whatever work my hands can share, with best effort and with care, may I always find you here inside this heart. Through every joy and sorrow that I face, on every road I walk, through every place, with every step I take, your endless grace guides me ever on, gives me every song. So many stars do shine on me, so many prayers of peace there be. May that peace be found in me within this heart, and may that peace fill up the world, from ocean's depths to stars a world, be found in every boy and girl, in every heart. Through every joy and sorrow that we face, on every road we walk, through every place, with every step we take, your endless grace guides us ever on, gives us every song. However long life stands will be, your rhythms play so endlessly, and move my feet continually in your dance. I give to you my every song, my mind and heart to you belong, and when at last life's dance is done, to you I'll come. Through every joy and sorrow that I face, on every road I walk, through every place, with every step I take, your endless grace guides me ever on, fills me up with every song. Whatever beauty there may be that my eyes do see, may your beauty ever be inside this heart. Whatever work my hands can share, with best effort and with care, may I always find you here inside this heart, inside this heart. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the transient to the eternal.
lead us from darkness to light, lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all again. It's been a few months, actually. How many of you have been following or were following the Buddhist peace walk? Quite a few, right? It became a kind of global phenomenon, thanks in part to social media and the internet. It's quite inspiring. 19 monks traveling across the country, 2,300 miles in 108 days. A dog joined them. All sorts of adventures. One of the monks had his leg amputated, unfortunately, because of a truck accident, things like that. Today I want to talk about a much earlier peace march, which was in many ways deeper, more radical, just more hardcore in a certain way, which is not to judge this one, but it's much less well known, and I think it deserves to be much better known. A humble American lady in the 20th century who called herself Peace Pilgrim. And she walked all over the country by herself, not in a group, but by herself, for 28 years. At a time when, in a country and at a time where this kind of thing is completely unknown and risky and dangerous at the same time. How many of you have heard of Peace Pilgrim, by the way? A few of you, that's good, it's good. What's funny is I first got to know about Peace Pilgrim not here. I grew up in the US, in Boston, like her actually. But I only found out about Peace Pilgrim when I moved to India, when I first became a monk. We have this 2-year training center. And it was then that one of my teachers, Swami Medhananda ji, he said, hey, you should read this book called Peace Pilgrim. She's a very inspiring lady. And that's how I found out. But it's quite striking, right, that I lived in the US for 30 years and I never heard her name. And then I came to India, and within a couple of years I heard about it. So I feel that this talk would be a success if more people felt inspired to learn about the life and teachings of Peace Pilgrim. Why is Peace Pilgrim so important? Why are her life and teachings so valuable for us today in 2026? Well, I want to suggest at least 5 reasons. First, she's extremely humble, and she would always kind of say that I'm just an ordinary person like you and me, and it's very inspiring to see how somebody can become a saint just through simple spiritual practices. And she's very practical, and the kind of advice and teaching she gives are very relevant to us in our day-to-day lives as struggling spiritual aspirants. The mic there's some feedback. Should I hold the mic closer, or what do you? Yes? Okay, all right. Is this better? Okay, thank you. Okay. In some centers, I'm told not to move the mic. Whatever you do, don't touch it. And so but this is the opposite. Okay, so sorry. I should have touched the mic. Okay, so that's the first reason. Very, very helpful practical teachings for spiritual aspirants. Second, I see her as a kind of spiritual scientist who discovered some of the fundamental truths of Vedanta on her own, without having studied scriptures, without having learned under a guru, but just through her own experiences and practices. So it's quite remarkable. Third reason, she didn't have a human guru, as far as I'm aware. She doesn't talk about one, at least. So from the very beginning, and it's quite striking, she accepted the inner divine as her guru, as her inner guide. And that tallies well with something that Sri Ramakrishna used to say, that Satchit Ananda is the true guru, the true teacher. Satchit Ananda meaning existence, consciousness, bliss, the supreme divine. And these days, there's a saying in India that everybody wants to be a guru, nobody wants to be a disciple. And that's especially true these days. All you need is a YouTube account, long hair, a guitar, you become a guru. So no, but she teaches us you don't need a guru if you're receptive to the divine within. 2 more reasons, and then we'll get started. 4th reason. A lot of you, I'm sure, have heard of this SBNR movement, spiritual but not religious. And I've given a separate talk on this in Trabuco Canyon, so I'm not going to go into that. But I think that her teachings, her life story, her spiritual experiences really resonate with this SBNR kind of attitude, which is that you don't have to be a card-carrying X, Y, or Z. You don't have to be a fundamentalist or believe anything on blind faith in order to pursue a spiritual life and attain the heights of spiritual realization as well. And finally, this is a little bit more of a subtle point, but I think it's important. What we'll find is that the keynote of her life and teachings are very simple things, like surrender, simple faith, devotion, selfless service. And why do I think that's important for us now? Well, because it seems to me that one of the greatest vices of our age, and what do I mean by our age? I'm kind of drawing a broad canvas here, but our post-Enlightenment age, at least from a Western standpoint, it's very intellectually top-heavy, very head-centered. And I don't think it's a surprise that most of the glamorous spiritual practices that are very popular in the West especially are head-oriented. Mindfulness, Neo-Advaitins who say, I am Brahman, and so we don't need to bother with ethical and spiritual practices and so on and so forth. You just have to intellectually tell yourself, I am Brahman. So I think that her life and teachings are a healthy antidote to our intellectually top-heavy age. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's this beautiful phrase where Lord Krishna says that the journey of spiritual life is a journey from head to heart. Mano Riddhi Niruddhya. You have to stop the machinations of the mind, that what Eckhart Tolle calls the voice in the head. You have to stop it in the heart. And Peace Pilgrim helps us to see how we can move from head to heart. Okay. So I'll be drawing throughout this talk on one particular book, which I recommend that you all read, called Peace Pilgrim. Easy to find online, very cheap. It's not her own writing. She never wrote an autobiography. She was too humble to do that. These are transcripts of recordings of talks and conversations that she had with people that she met along the way on her, as I said, 28-year journey alone. So just a brief bio. She was very hesitant to even talk about her life, but we get some glimpses. She was born in Boston in the first decade of the 20th century. Her family was not particularly religious. In high school, she started developing this intense spiritual yearning, and she just kept asking herself and others, what is God? What is God? Just spontaneously. This is similar to people who know something about our tradition might know that Swami Medhananda, the chief disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, that when he was very young, as a college student, he was going around Kolkata in India, asking people, have you seen God? Have you seen God? And then he finally discovered Sri Ramakrishna. So this is similar. What is God? What is God? And she talks about her high school life in a really disarming way. She says, I know I was being prepared for the pilgrimage when I made certain choices. For instance, I was in grammar school when I was offered cigarettes from a package, which I did not smoke, but my friends did. In high school, I was offered all kinds of alcohol, which I didn't drink, but my friends did. Then just after my student days, I was faced with a kind of test because all of my friends at that time used both alcohol and tobacco. There was such a push toward conformity in those days. They call it peer pressure now, that they actually looked down on me because I didn't do these things. So peer pressure is this huge problem now. It's always been. It's even worse now, I'd say. And gathered in someone's living room, I said to them, look, life is a series of choices. And nobody can stop you from making your choices. But I have a right to make my own choices too. And I have chosen freedom. I have chosen freedom. It's a beautiful way to put it. She was really a kind of Vedantin at heart. Why freedom? Freedom means you don't depend on anything external for your well-being, for your contentment, for your happiness. She doesn't need substances to make her happy. She said, I felt a complete willingness. While she's walking through the woods, and she says, I felt a complete willingness without any reservations to give my life, to dedicate my life to service. Please use me, I prayed to God, and a great peace came over me. And it was during that profound walk that she felt this inner calling to work for peace and walk for peace throughout the US. And this peace march, this peace walk, was not about external peace, it was about internal peace, actually. Because you can't really have external peace without inner peace. Inner peace is always the precondition for external peace. And when I said that her walk was hardcore, she didn't just decide one day to start walking and go. 15 years of spiritual preparation, ethical and spiritual preparation. This was time taken to reflect and to try her best to remove any kind of egoism and selfishness from her life and from her motives. This is what in Vedanta is called nishkama karma, selfless service. So this is one of the main things that she did. 15 years where she spent most of her time serving the mentally ill, those who are challenged in various ways. And that was on the external side. But then internally, she described this 15-year period of preparation as a tremendous internal struggle with her, what she calls her lower nature. She has these beautiful terms that she uses. So she referred to that lower nature as her self-centered nature. And she also felt called to renounce everything that she didn't absolutely need. She called that simplification of life. And she became a vegetarian. She was a celibate for most of her life. She did marry in 33, and she divorced in 1946. And then she began the pilgrimage that lasted 28 years on January 1st, 1953. In India, it's pretty common for a renunciate to wander all over the country, and the culture is saturated with with ideals of spirituality and renunciation. And so if you're a wandering monk and you're going on your pilgrimage, there are going to be people out there who will offer you food and help you in various ways if you need medical treatment. But in the US at that time, just imagine, for a woman by herself to be wandering around the country alone, it's extraordinary. And so it was obviously not easy. She had all sorts of challenges, but she depended on the divine, she surrendered to the divine, and the divine guided her and protected her throughout. I'm going to read to you from the book describing her possessions for those 28 years. She wore a navy blue shirt and slacks, and a short tunic with pockets all around the bottom, in which she carried her only worldly possessions: a comb, a folding toothbrush, a ballpoint pen, copies of her message, and her current correspondence. So she wrote letters. That's it. Everything she kept on her own person. And where did she stay? 28 years, where do you stay? She didn't have a house. So she would sometimes sleep outside under trees. If somebody offered their place to stay in, she would stay in their guest room. But she just surrendered completely. It was extraordinary. She was an extraordinary woman, actually. I mean, I said that she's ordinary in a certain sense, but she's extraordinary too. She sometimes felt called to engage in pretty extreme austerities. One example is that she decided to fast for 45 days, having nothing but distilled water. 45 days. And she never felt weak. And during that fast, I mean, the whole point is, it's one thing to just kind of put yourself through a physical challenge, but for her, it was a spiritual exercise, and it was a way of learning how to completely surrender to the divine. And so her prayer throughout that fast was, "Make me an instrument through which only truth can speak." And her main spiritual practice was, she herself describes it as praying without ceasing. This is a phrase, of course, from the Bible. St. Paul recommends it. And it's an important practice in Eastern Orthodox Christianity. Some of you probably are familiar with a book called Way of the Pilgrim. So that was her main practice. it's a kind of, we'll talk about our prayer in more detail a little bit later, but praying without ceasing, constantly thinking of the divine, surrendering to the divine, calling on the divine. But who or what is the divine for Peace Pilgrim? Not any kind of form. Not a human form, so she didn't talk about Christ, Jesus Christ, in the traditional sense. She did talk about Christ, but in this deeper sense. It seems to me, from my research, my understanding of what she taught, that her understanding of God was as a higher power that's formless, but who loves us. Formless but personal. A supreme being who is formless and perfectly loving, and who governs this world and dwells within our hearts, importantly. And she realized the divine in her own heart. And she talks about it in various places in her own humble way. She says, to know God is to reflect love toward all people and all creations. To know God is to feel peace within, a calmness, a serenity, an unshakableness which enables you to face any situation. To know God is to be so filled with joy that it bubbles over and goes forth to bless the world. You can find God if you will only seek, by obeying divine laws, by loving people, by relinquishing self-will, attachments, negative thoughts, and feelings. And when you find God, it will be in the stillness. You will find God within. Any of you who are familiar with Vedanta will know this is pure Vedanta, actually. Sri Ramakrishna used to define the Jivan Mukta, the one who has attained enlightenment or liberation while still in the physical body, as somebody who knows that God alone is the doer, that we're just instruments in the hands of the divine. What does Peace Pilgrim say? She says, my illusory self is dead. The real self controls the garment of clay, her physical body, and uses it for God's work. I think this is a very healthy attitude toward the body, which, especially with visually oriented social media like Instagram, there are all sorts of scientific studies about how, especially female teens and young people in general, are suffering all sorts of mental health issues, anxiety, depression, and so on, because they're so closely identified with their bodies, and there's a kind of arms race to look as beautiful as possible, to look prettier than your friends, and so on and so forth, so that you get more likes on your posts. So in this day and age, I think her teachings are especially relevant for everybody, young and old. A healthy attitude toward the body is that I am not the body is my instrument. How did most of you get here? By car, right? You don't say I am my car, you say I use the car to serve my purposes. That's a healthier attitude toward the body. And it's also very Vedantic. If you go back to one of our most ancient scriptures, the Katha Upanishad, you'll find that the sage there uses a beautiful metaphor to explain the relationship between the body and the soul. The body is likened to a chariot. So these days you can say a car, but at that time, a chariot. And the soul is the rider in the chariot, the passenger, who directs the charioteer being our intellect. So I think her teachings resonate with that idea. In fact, there are many, many deep resonances between her teachings and Vedanta. And as I said, she kind of discovered these on her own through her own spiritual practices and experiences, so I think they're very valuable. One of the fundamental teachings that she emphasizes again and again is a distinction between a higher and a lower nature. She says, I was not far down the spiritual road when I became acquainted with what the psychologists refer to as ego and conscience, which I call the lower self and the higher self, or the self-centered nature and the God-centered nature. It's as though we have two selves or natures or two wills with two contrary viewpoints. Your lower self sees things from the viewpoint of your physical well-being only. Your higher self considers your psychological or spiritual well-being. Your lower self sees you as a center of the universe. Your higher self sees you as a cell in the body of humanity. When you are governed by your lower self, you are selfish and materialistic. But insofar as you follow the promptings of your higher self, you will see things realistically and find harmony within yourself and others. The body, mind, and emotions are instruments which can be used by either the self-centered nature or the God-centered nature. The self-centered nature uses these instruments, yet it is never fully able to control them, so there's a constant struggle. They can only be fully controlled by the God-centered nature. When the God-centered nature takes over, you have found inner peace. So this was her message. To really achieve inner peace, you have to identify with your deeper spiritual, God-centered, divine nature. Sri Ramakrishna used to distinguish, very similarly, two kinds of I, two forms of identity. One he calls the rascal I, the I attached to selfish things, the things of the world. Bodjat Ami in Bengali. And he said that in spiritual life, we need to transform that I, that selfish I, that self-centered I, into the I of a devotee, the spiritual I, Bhaktir Ami. So we don't have to eliminate the I. See, the idea of getting rid of ego, it's easy to talk about and almost impossible to practice. But it's a matter of transforming the ego, transforming the I from a selfish I to a selfless and spiritual and divine I. And that's very much in line with what Peace Pilgrim is teaching. Peace Pilgrim says, there is a spark of good in everybody, no matter how deeply it may be buried. It is the real you. When I say you, what am I really thinking of? Am I thinking of the clay garment, the body? No, that's not the real you. Am I thinking of the self-centered nature? No, that's also not the real you. The real you is that divine spark. Some call this the God-centered nature, others the divine nature, and the kingdom of God within. The important thing to remember is that it dwells within you. So notice how broad and non-sectarian her teachings are. This is what I think is so appealing to people of a modern sensibility. In the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 15, Krishna says that each of us, as divine souls, are sparks of the divine fire. Mamevamsho jiva loke jiva bhuta sanatanaha. Each one of us is an eternal spark of the divine. She's saying exactly the same thing. But here's the million-dollar question. How exactly do we realize our higher nature, our divine nature? Easier said than done. She outlines, very practically, 3 main steps in this process of realizing our higher divine nature and thereby attaining inner peace. What are those 3 steps? She calls them preparations, purifications, and relinquishments. Preparations, purifications, relinquishments, in that order. So what were 3 main preparations? First, adopt a right attitude toward life. What's the right attitude? Always be positive. Don't be one of those people who sees the glass as half empty all the time, right? Try to find the silver lining in everything. Try to learn from every experience, positive, negative, or otherwise. Swami Medhananda used to say, I'm a Hindu chaplain at USC and UCLA, and I often quote this because I think it's so relevant to everybody, and especially the youth. The secret of life is not enjoyment, but education through experience. So this attitude of learning, Sri Ramakrishna used to say, as long as I live, so long do I learn. So long do I learn. As long as I live, so long do I learn. That attitude of receptivity, openness, positivity. So that was one of her main preparations. Another preparation. This is very profound and again, very resonant with Vedantic themes. She says, each one of us, when we embark on spiritual life, needs to try to discover our special place in the life pattern. This is her own words. She says, every one of us has a special place in the life pattern, and no 2 people have exactly the same part to play in God's plan. There's a guidance which comes from within to all who will listen. Through this guidance, each one will feel drawn to some part in the scheme of things. We must remain open to God's guidance. When you come into this world, your jobs in the divine plan are there. They just need to be realized and lived. If you don't yet know where you fit, I suggest that you try seeking it in receptive silence. I used to walk amid the beauties of nature, just receptive and silent, and wonderful insights would come to me. You begin to do your part in the life pattern by doing all of the good things you feel motivated toward, even though they are just little good things at first. You give these priority in your life over all the superficial things that customarily clutter human lives. For those of you who know something about the Vedantic scriptures, the Bhagavad Gita in particular, you'll find that one of the keynotes of that scripture is what Krishna calls Swadharma, discovering our own law of being, discovering our place in the divine cosmic pattern. Once you do that, you enter a kind of flow state where just by fulfilling your duties to the best of your ability and as unselfishly as possible, you can attain the highest, you can realize the divine. And then a third preparation is what she calls simplification of life. Crucial to this practice is distinguishing wants from needs. A lot of what we think we need are actually just wants, but we deceive ourselves, right? So it's a very honest kind of practice where you have to distinguish what do I really need versus what do I just want, right? And she reduced her life to just a kind of need level rather than want level. And then the second main practice, purifications. This is pretty intense and applies to all levels of our being. So purification of the body, how does she do that? Through a vegetarian diet. Purification of thought. Because if you just have a pure body but impure thoughts, you'll never have that inner peace. So purify your thoughts. Think only of lofty and positive and spiritual things. Purification of desire. What does it mean to purify desire? It doesn't mean you have to get rid of desires. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, turn your desires toward God. Give them a Godward turn. So desire only to fulfill God's will. That was her practice. And to do that, what do you have to do? You have to purge yourself of all of your self-centered, selfish desires. Purification of motive. We should try to remove any kind of selfish motives from our day-to-day actions. That's why selfless service was such an important part of her day-to-day practice for so long. I think it's a very, very useful practice for all of us. So in Vedantic terms, her main practice for a long time was converting or transforming karma, work, into karma yoga. A yoga of selfless action. And her internal state at the time was this kind of, you can imagine, a kind of burning furnace. Just doing good things is not enough. You have to inspect your motives. What are your motives behind doing those good things? Imagine somebody with a lot of money and they donate a bunch of money to a hospital or something, right? It's objectively good. But subjectively, what are those person's motives for giving that money? Is there some kind of desire for recognition, for name and fame? Do they want their name on a plaque? This wing donated by so-and-so. If so, then there's some what's called rajas in Vedanta, which means your motives become at least partly selfish as a result. So the challenge in karma yoga is to remove, first of all, detect any selfish motives and then to completely eliminate them. So that your only motive is to serve the divine and to serve others through the divine. She also says, this is quite striking, she says, I talk to groups studying the most advanced spiritual teachings, and sometimes these people wonder why nothing is happening in their lives. Their motive is the attainment of inner peace for themselves, which of course is a selfish motive. This is also interesting. If you only care about inner peace for yourself, that's a higher form of selfishness. You will not find it with this motive. The motive, if you were to find inner peace, must be an outgoing motive. Service, of course, service. Giving, not getting. Your motive must be good if your work is to have good effect. The secret of life is being of service. In our tradition, there's a beautiful incident that illustrates the same point. The future Swami Medhananda, at the time he was a very young man, he was called Narendra. And he once came to Sri Ramakrishna and said, I want nothing more than to immerse myself in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, which is considered to be the highest spiritual state, where you lose external consciousness and you're merged in Brahman, the highest truth. And just come down once in a while to, take some milk or something, some food to keep the body going, and then go back up and to forget about this world. And Sri Ramakrishna gave him the scolding of a lifetime and said, shame on you. I thought you would be like a great banyan tree, giving shade and shelter to the thousands. Now I see you're selfish. You only care about your own liberation. Aren't you the one who sings, O Lord, thou art all that exists? So Sri Ramakrishna moved Swami Vivekananda away from this kind of higher form of spiritual selfishness to having this universal heart. And one of his main teachings was Shiva Jnane Jiva Seva, Sri Ramakrishna. He would say, serve others in a spirit of worship by trying to see the same divine in all beings. So that all falls under purifications. And then there's that third step, relinquishments. It's a term that's not used that often these days. Renunciation, giving things up. What do you have to give up in spiritual life? First, relinquishment of self-will. Avoid doing things that make you feel more selfish, more egoistic, more me, me, me. She says, you can work on subordinating the lower self by refraining from doing the not good things you may be motivated toward. Not suppressing them, but transforming them so that the higher self can take over your life. If you are motivated to do or say a mean thing, you can always think of a good thing. You deliberately turn around and use that same energy to do or say a good thing instead. It works. So see how simple our teachings are. And there's nothing unnatural about this. There's no suppression here or repression. It's about taking those packets of energy that are in us and turning them toward a higher purpose. This is what in yoga philosophy is called pratipaksha bhavanam, which means cultivating the opposite, more uplifting and spiritual attitude. Whenever you have some kind of negative feeling or state of mind, you try to cultivate the opposite feeling. And Sri Ramakrishna would say the same thing, morphirya though. Whatever feeling you have, he says, if you have lust, if you have anger, no problem. You don't have to get rid of those things. Lust, if you have to feel lust, lust after God. If you have to feel angry that God isn't revealing himself to you, and so on and so forth. What else do we have to relinquish? Relinquishment of the feeling of separateness. Holy Mother Sharada Devi, the wife of Sri Ramakrishna, said exactly the same thing, almost her last words. Nobody's a stranger. Everybody is our very own. That's what we have to realize. And when we realize our higher spiritual nature, we'll realize that we're all part of one vast spiritual family. We're all sparks of the same divine fire. As Peace Pilgrim put it, our higher nature is a drop in the ocean of God. Each one of us is a drop in the ocean of God. We also need to relinquish attachments. She talks at length about this. She says, no one is truly free who is still attached to material things or to places or to people. These are hard words. Material things must be put into their proper place. They are there for use. It's all right to use them. That's what they're for. They're there for. But when they've outlived their usefulness, be ready to relinquish them and perhaps pass them on to someone who does need them. And then she talks about attachment to human beings. There's another kind of possessiveness. You do not possess any other human being, no matter how closely related that other may be. No husband owns his wife. No wife owns her husband. No parents own their children. When we think we possess people, there's a tendency to run their lives for them, and out of this develop extremely inharmonious situations. So we all know about helicopter parenting and so on, right? Sri Ramakrishna used to say, "Keo karud noi." Nobody belongs to anybody. So again, these very deep resonances between Vedanta and what Peace Pilgrim is teaching. We're all sparks of the same divine. What else do we have to relinquish? Any kind of negative feelings. She says, I want to mention just one negative feeling which the nicest people still experience. And that negative feeling is worry. What we call anxiety now, right? Worry is not concern, which would motivate you to do everything possible in a situation. Worry is a useless mulling over of things we cannot change. That's when worry becomes anxiety, right? When you think about things needlessly and fruitlessly. No benefit comes out of it, but it's a kind of disease, or a kind of mental disease, or a kind of obsession, right? What are some of her other spiritual teachings that I think can be really helpful to all of us? She says, I am, in my frame of reference, I was not the body. I was just wearing the body. Notice the language. I was just wearing the body like we wear clothes. I am that which activates the body. That's the reality. If I am killed, it destroys merely the clay garment, the body. This is almost word for word You can find this in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. And Krishna, Lord Krishna in the Gita, likens the human body to a set of clothes that we wear in the course of the day, then it gets worn out. We cast off the pair of clothes, we put on a new set of clothes. Just like that, the soul, the embodied soul, takes up one physical body. Once it's served its purpose, casts off that body, and then takes on another one. She also, like Sri Ramakrishna, taught the harmony of religions. She says, religion is not an end in itself. One's union with God is the ultimate goal. There are so many religions because immature people tend to emphasize trivial differences instead of important likenesses. Differences between faiths lie in creeds and rituals rather than religious principles. How diverse the many paths seem to be at times, but do they not all come together eventually? If you are guided toward a faith, use it as a stepping stone to God, not as a barrier between yourself and God's other children, or as a tower to hold you aloft from others. I think this is really important. She says, we are all God's children and there are no favorites. God is revealed to all who seek. So we have to avoid religious fundamentalism. What often happens in spiritual life is the deeper we go into our own tradition, the more we sacrifice breadth and the narrower we become. And there's the opposite danger, which I think is probably more common these days, which is you become so broad that you become superficial. You become kind of spiritual dilettantes. And one day you dabble in Zen Buddhism, the next day it's something else, and you can never really dive deep. But how do you combine depth with breadth? This is also what Peace Pilgrim embodies, I think, and what you find in Vedanta. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, God is like a mother, a loving mother, who cooks fish for her 5 children. She doesn't make the same kind of fish preparation for all her children because she's got a baby who has a very weak stomach, right? Of course. And so she's going to make fish soup. But she's got a growing teenage boy. So what does she make for him? A fish fry, and so on. So likewise, God has created different religions to suit different stomachs, different temperaments, in different cultures, different climates, different societies, and so on, and different temperaments. In the Katha Upanishad, Upanishad I mentioned earlier, one of the great Vedantic scriptures, there's a beautiful mantra which goes Shreyascha Preyascha Manushyametastav Samariti Vivirakti Dhiraha, and so on. 2 paths confront every human being, the path of Shreya and the path of Preya. Shreya means the path of perfection, spiritual perfection. And the other, Preya, is the path of enjoyment, worldly enjoyment. And this verse, this mantra says, the first step in spiritual life is to clearly distinguish in our heads what is the path of Preya and what is the path, Shreya, and what is the path of Preya. And then to choose to tread the path of Shreya, the path of perfection rather than enjoyment. And Shankaracharya has a great commentary on this verse where he says, where a lot of people go wrong is at the very first step. They mistake the path of Shreya for the path of Preya. They think they're being very spiritual, but it ends up being the path of worldly enjoyment. I'm reminded, I don't want to call anyone out here, but with the Epstein files, we're starting to find that there are some big spiritual gurus who have been outed as frauds, basically. One of his great sayings was what? God is a construct, cute girls alone are real, something insane like that. It's very disturbing stuff that's coming out. But that's an example of just in your own head confusing worldly enjoyments and justifying worldly enjoyments in the name of spirituality and making, becoming rich as a result. What were her teachings on God? She says, look at how broad they are. God is love. And whenever you reach out in loving kindness, you are expressing God. God is truth. And whenever you seek truth, you are seeking God. God is beauty. And whenever you touch the beauty of a flower or a sunset, you are touching God. God is the intelligence that creates all and sustains all and binds all together and gives life to all. Yes, God is the essence of all. So you are within God and God is within you. Again, almost word for word, you find this in the Bhagavad Gita and the Isha Upanishad. You could not be where God is not. What about atheists? You might be wondering, she's talking about God. Even the word God these days has certain connotations. If you don't like the word God, I like the word divine, for instance, the divine. But she says about atheists, there's really no such thing as an atheist, for within that person is the divine nature. which, when awakened, will feel close to God. There are those who call themselves atheists. For some of them, I've defined God intellectually as the creative force, the sustaining power, the motivation toward change, the overall intelligence, truth. Look at how she was a great teacher, even though she didn't have the ego of a guru or a teacher, but she tried to understand each person's temperament and then taught them accordingly. Then she says, emotionally, so she feels that people are feeling-oriented atheists. She would say, emotionally, she would explain that God is love, goodness, kindness, beauty. Spiritually, as the ever-present, all-pervading essence or spirit which binds everything in the universe together and gives life to everything in the universe. So again, this very strong resonances with this SBNR, spiritual but not religious movement. Swami Medhananda said something similar when he was once asked, how can one have bhakti? How do we develop love for God? And his answer was, there is bhakti within you. You already love God. Each one of us is actually a lover of God, even the atheists. He says, only a veil of lust and greed, worldly attachments and desires, covers that innate love for God that we all have. And then he says, as soon as that is removed, that veil is removed, that veil of impurities, that innate love of God will manifest by itself. How does she think about the relationship between the human soul, the individual soul, and the divine? She says, think of God as a divine ocean, and you as one drop with free will. You can choose to remain separate from the ocean, but you won't be happy. You can choose to be a part of the ocean, in which case you will give up your free will, but you will be delightfully happy, acting in harmony with God's will. This is very interesting. If you look at the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, Sri Ramakrishna often talks about free will. A lot of people were concerned about and asking, do we really have free will? And his answer is an emphatic no. We don't have free will as body-mind complexes. We don't have free will as ego. We think we do. The Gita says, ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. People who are deluded by egoism, they think, I am the doer. I'm so great. I'm free to do X, Y, and Z. But remember, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, the Jivan Mukta, the enlightened person, is the one who knows that God alone is the doer. But what happens? It might sound like that's kind of bleak. We don't have any free will. In a certain sense, yes. As egos, we don't. As body minds, we don't. But as the divine, as sparks of the divine fire, we inherit God's free will. God alone is free. So to the extent that we can identify with divine consciousness, we inherit that divine freedom. That's exactly Peace Pilgrim's position as well. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, this is a powerful spiritual practice, be like a baby kitten who just says, mew, mew. And mother cat will take her up in her mouth and plop her wherever she feels like. And then the culmination of that practice is actually becoming that baby kitten. Having no self-will and just being completely surrendered to the divine. That's true free will and true freedom. What about, you might be curious, well, I'm saying that she was a kind of Vedantin. What about karma and rebirth? These are doctrines that are fundamental to Vedanta and Hinduism more generally. Karma and rebirth, what did she say? She had a kind of intuitive belief in these things. She didn't, I don't think she thought about them intellectually and the pros and cons, but she just experientially accepted them intuitively. She says, in each being, there is a divine nature called by various names. After sufficient lifetimes, it begins to govern the being. So notice, this is just very spontaneous in her teachings. That being stands out from the crowd. There have been quite a few. The important thing is that it can govern you. So it's in the course of many, many lifetimes that our divine nature, our selfless spiritual nature begins to take over our being and govern our lives. In most people, it's the self-centered nature that dominates, right? But spiritual life is a journey of many, many lifetimes. As Gita puts it, aneka janma samsiddhas tato yati parangatim, which means having attained purification and perfection in the course of many lifetimes, one finally attains the highest goal of spiritual perfection. What about karma? Somebody asks her point blank, what is karma? And she says, karma is the law of cause and effect. As you sow, so shall you reap. Seen over a span of many lifetimes. So she also sees, like all Hindus, the doctrines of karma and rebirth going hand in hand. She says, those who get ulcers as a result of hating someone prove to themselves, if they have eyes to see, that the law of karma works. What about prayer? She says a lot of beautiful things about prayer. Remember, her main practice was praying without ceasing. Sri Ramakrishna, if you look at the gospel, you'll find that on almost every page, he's encouraging prayer. He himself is praying to Divine Mother. And he would often say we should pray with tears in our eyes. The prayer shouldn't be mechanical, it should come from the heart. And she says exactly the same thing. Peace Pilgrim says, praying without ceasing is not ritualized, nor are there even words. It is a constant state of awareness of oneness with God. It is a sincere seeking for a good thing. And it is a concentration on the thing sought with faith that it is obtainable. All right prayer has good effect, but if you give your whole life to the prayer, you multiply its power. No one really knows the full power of prayer. Receptive prayer results in an inner receiving, which motivates to right action. And she says elsewhere, the most important part of prayer is what we feel, not what we say. We spend a great deal of time telling God what we think should be done, and not enough time waiting in the stillness for God to tell us what to do. This is really important. Most of us, when we pray for selfish things and for what the ego wants. The higher prayer is either praying for spiritual things, like devotion, detachment, and so on, or just being receptive, being open, listening to what God has to tell us. Mahatma Gandhi said something very similar about prayer. He said, prayer is not a repetition of an empty formula. It is better in prayer to have a heart without words than words without heart. I think that's just another way of putting exactly what Peace Pilgrim is talking about here. Self-forgiveness, another important motif these days. She practiced that herself. She says, during the preparation period, so that early phase, I wasn't fully identifying with the real me. I was just learning. I was very forgiving toward others. That was no problem. But I was very unforgiving toward myself. If I did something that wasn't the highest, I would say to myself, you ought to know better. So she was kind of hard on herself. And then one day, as I was combing my hair at the mirror, I looked at myself and said, you vain thing, why do you think you know better when you forgive everyone else for not knowing better? You're not any better than they are. What an interesting way to put this. You're not any better than they are. And then she says, you must learn to forgive yourself as easily as you forgive others. And then take a further step and use all that energy that you used in condemning yourself for improving yourself. And then she says, after that, I really started to get somewhere because there's only one person you can change, and that's yourself. After you have changed yourself, you might be able to inspire others to look for change. So to sum up, what exactly did Peace Pilgrim stand for? She stood for very simple things: simplicity, purity, devotion, surrender, selfless service. And these are the qualities that made her great. Often you'll find these surveys done. Who are the greatest Americans? And people give different answers, and they'll say things like, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Edison, Marie Curie, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, T.S. Eliot, whatever, famous Hollywood celebrities. Often, especially in the West, you find that greatness is measured by external achievements. But I would humbly suggest that Peace Pilgrim deserves to be recognized as one of America's greatest products, actually. And we should be proud of her. And more of us should know about her life and her very inspiring teachings. And I hope I made a case that her teachings are as relevant now as they ever were. And I wanted to close by inviting you to join me for a devotional meditation and prayer that she herself recommended. And I'm just going to close with her own words. Please close your eyes. Know that you are God's beautiful child, always in God's hands. Accept God. Accept God's protection. There is really no problem to fear. Know that you are not the clay garment. Know that you are not the self-centered nature which governs your life needlessly. Know that you are the God-centered nature. the kingdom of God within, the indwelling Christ, eternal and indestructible. Identify with the real you. Peace, be still, and know that I am God. Peace, be still, and know that I am. Peace, be still, and know. Peace, be still. Peace, be. Peace, peace, peace. And now, with the knowledge that we are God's perfect children, separate way, but way in spirit. Thank you.
Through my every thought and all the words that I say and everything that I do, please guide me in every way, each night and day, wherever place I may go. Please give me wisdom to know your love is in every heart. You fill each part in the light of the soul, the light of the soul. You're the love of all loves, the light of all lights, nearer than the nearest, dearer than the dearest. We are all your children, whether near or far. Help us always to remember just who we are, just who we are. We are your sons and daughters, sisters and brothers, all. This gift of life you have given to us, one and all, both great and small. You are the love of all loves, the light of all lights, nearer than the nearest, dearer than the dearest, the fountain of bliss, the abode of grace. Fill us all up with joy, with the sight of your face. Through my every thought and all the words that I say and everything that I do, please guide me in every way, each night and day, wherever place I may go. Please give me wisdom to know your love is in every heart. You fill each part in the light of the soul, the light of the soul. You're the love of all loves, the light of all lights, nearer than the nearest, dearer than
Some announcements. Today is Shivaratri. We'll be celebrating Shivaratri here. It starts at 6 p.m. 6 p.m. is the first watch. 7:30 p.m. is the second watch. 8:45 is the third watch. It goes from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. And then, wait, is there anything? There's a fourth watch as well at 10 p.m. Yeah. On February 18th is the worship of Sri Ramakrishna. So Sri Ramakrishna Puja starts at 11 a.m. And then at 12:45 p.m. is the Homa fire. And then at 1:30 there's Prasad lunch. And next Sunday, February 22nd, Swami Medhananda will be speaking on the topic Love Without Leashes. Leashes, not leeches, but leashes. I think that's it. Anything else? Gospel class. And there is a... okay. It's on Saturday, 5 p.m. There's a gospel class. Oh, it's down there. Okay, yeah. By Swami Medhananda. Okay, thank you, everyone. I'll be greeting you outside, and then we'll hold a Q&A here. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. All right, so let's begin the Q&A. Feel free to ask whatever's on your mind. Don't be shy. Who wants to start us off? To hear the answers. You have no question. I answered all your questions, huh? No, why don't you? You got a question, no? Yeah, no? No. Observation. Oh, well, do you want to hand the mic to him? Thank you. Just speak. Yeah, speak to the mic. Yeah.
I introduced to Hinduism through
Please keep it close to your mouth.
Self-realization fellowship is what
I
I've
see.
been doing for 41 years. And, Paramahansa Yogananda, their guru, always spoke very highly of Vedanta and of the founder. Now, I think I've been saying his name wrong. They say...
Paramahamsa Yogananda.
No, Swami, they say Vivekananda, but you say it differently.
Well, Vivekananda.
How you?
I would emphasize the second syllable, so Vivekananda.
Vivekananda.
Yeah.
I'll work on that because I
that's
to
all right.
say it correctly.
It's a minor thing. Yeah.
So I mean, it's nice to see the love and the real similarity and the depth of the heart and mind, both in all of these different paths.
Yeah.
They're very, very similar. Way more similar than different. So
Absolutely.
It's very nice. So we're here from. We just kind of moved to the Santa Barbara area.
Oh,
so
welcome.
It's nice to discover this temple.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Questions?
Nobody asks questions. They just want to listen.
I guess so. Well, what do you want me to talk about? Yeah. Okay. We got somebody. Oh, okay. Great question. Yeah. So, I mentioned a couple times this growing movement called SBNR, spiritual but not religious, and this gentleman has a question about that. Can I expand on that? I don't want to come off as, or I hope that I didn't give the impression that I wholeheartedly endorse the SBNR movement. That was not my intention. So let me clarify my stance on being spiritual but not religious. I think that we should empathize with people in that predicament, that situation. And I think it resonates with a lot of people these days, people who are sick and tired of and disenchanted with religious fundamentalism of various kinds. And the temptation is to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Okay? To say that all religion is flawed and therefore I want to be spiritual but not religious. Right? Now, I think that the mistake in that impulse is to make sweeping generalizations about religion and judging religion and defining religion in terms of its worst exponents. And I think that's a real mistake. And this is common. This is what stereotyping involves, right? It's like you take one person and say, all people who are like that are terrible, and so we shouldn't make that mistake. There are beautiful aspects to religion. And I think it's artificial, misleading, and frankly false to dichotomize, to set up a kind of dichotomy between religion on the one hand and spirituality on the other. And everything good belongs to spirituality and everything bad belongs to religion. This isn't right. And actually there's a similar, I'll come back to this, but there's a similar thing that happens with Hinduism versus Vedanta. Many people say, I'm a Vedantin, but I'm not Hindu. Which means what? Hinduism is everything cultural, ethnic, caste system, this, that, bad stuff. And then Vedanta is everything spiritual and good. This is silly. Vedanta is a tradition found within Hinduism. And if we had a more generous and broader and a more accurate understanding of Hinduism, then we wouldn't fall into these kinds of that dichotomizing tendency. So I think exactly the same thing can be said about religion versus spirituality. This setting up of verses, setting up religion as opposed to spirituality. What's the problem? Let's go back to the etymology of the word religion. Religio. Re means again, right? Re. And the ligio means binding or connecting. All that religion means is anything, any practice that helps to reconnect us with our divine source. That's all that religion is. Nothing fundamentalist about that, nothing narrow, nothing sectarian, nothing problematic as far as I can tell. In fact, I think the closest Sanskrit equivalent to religion, the English word religion, is, well, can anyone throw it? Ellis? I know you know. Yoga, exactly. Yoga. And not postural yoga, but yoga in its original Vedantic sense means any practice, any spiritual technology that helps to reconnect us to the divine. So the SBNR people might say, yeah, but that's what we call spirituality. Why are you then? But that's what religion means, etymologically. And of course, there are people who call themselves religious, who do all sorts of terrible things, but there are also all sorts of people who call themselves spiritual and do terrible things. And I think that we need to broaden our understanding of what it means to be religious. And we shouldn't let the worst exponents of religion dictate to us and determine what religion means in general. I think that's a serious mistake. And another reason why I think it's really important not to oppose religion with spirituality is that what can often happen among SBNRs, or whatever we would call these people, practitioners of SBNR, is that there is a danger, and I'm not saying everybody is like this, but there's a danger of kind of calling ourselves spiritual, but not bothering to do anything. It's a kind of, talking ourselves hoarse about how spiritual we are and looking down on those religious fundamentalists and those atheists and whatever, but then not doing anything. And because there's an important element to religion, which, of course, it's in spirituality, but I think it's foregrounded in religion. Practice, practice, practice. That's yoga in Sanskrit means that. It's a practice. Your life has to be grounded in practice. And religion helps to remind us of that. It's not enough to just take ayahuasca and get high and then go to different realms and whatever. No. Ethical and spiritual practice. And religion is the technology, as I said. And what does Vedanta say? It says that there are four main yogas. Karma yoga, the yoga of selfless service, as we saw exemplified in the life of Peace Pilgrim. Bhakti yoga, the yoga of devotion, the practice of devotion. Any kind of devotional practices fall under that heading. So prayer, worship, singing devotional songs, and so on, thinking of God. Jnana yoga, the path of knowledge. And here the path of knowledge can be defined in either a very narrow way or in a broader way. The path of knowledge defined narrowly is basically Shankara's practice, his path, which is just listening to the highest truth that we are the non-dual Brahman or non-dual pure consciousness, and then to reflect on that teaching and then to try to internalize and practice that teaching in our day-to-day lives. But there's a broader way that Swami Medhananda and Vedanta more generally defines the path of knowledge. Any spiritual practice that involves the mind or the intellect, reasoning. Anytime the reasoning is involved, that falls under the path of knowledge in a broader sense. And I also wanted to mention, because this is lesser well known, it's a kind of a deep cut within Vedanta, Ramanuja, who was a great bhakta. He founded a devotional school of Vedanta called Vishishtadvaita Vedanta, the qualified non-dual school of Vedanta. He also encouraged the path of knowledge, but in a sense quite different from Shankara's. They were at loggerheads on many issues. They debated each other and all that. But he also recommended the path of knowledge as a prerequisite for practicing bhakti yoga, this higher practice of devotion. So what is the path of knowledge for Ramanuja? The path of knowledge is meditating on our divine nature as eternal souls separate from the body-mind complex, separate from the psychophysical complex. I think this is far more practical, this practice of the path of knowledge. And it's something that we can combine with bhakti yoga and karma yoga and the other yogas without feeling any kind of internal conflict, without doctrinal problems. If you try to practice the narrower classical Advaitic path of knowledge with bhakti, for instance, and with selfless service, you run up against these serious contradictions, fatal contradictions, in my opinion. Most people, when they talk about Advaita, non-duality, they don't read Shankara. But if you read Shankara, what you're going to find is he says that you should not, the same spiritual aspirant at one and the same time, should not simultaneously practice the path of knowledge and the path of devotion and selfless service. You cannot and should not combine these yogas. Why? He says the path of knowledge is meant for higher spiritual aspirants who have very pure minds, who are eligible to practice that path. And those people who are highly spiritually evolved should not practice the path of devotion or selfless service anymore. And by contrast, they're inferior spiritual aspirants. What's the measure of inferiority? We have impure minds. Our minds are full of worldly desires and attachments. Those people are only qualified for bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, and karma yoga, the path of selfless service, selfless action. But the same person should not be mixing up the path of knowledge with karma and bhakti. That's a recipe for disaster from a classical Advaitic standpoint. But notice, if you understand the path of knowledge either in Vivekananda's very broad sense, as just any spiritual practice involving reasoning or the intellect, then there's no problem. You can be a devotee to your heart's content, you can engage in selfless action, at the same time you can engage in those kinds of spiritual practices. Or if you understand the path of knowledge in Ramanuja's sense, which I think is more practical. If you look at the Peace Pilgrim's teachings carefully, I think what she teaches is more the Ramanuja devotionally oriented path of knowledge. This is not realizing your true nature as impersonal, attributeless, non-dual pure consciousness. You're realizing that you are a drop in the ocean of God. That's Ramanuja's path of knowledge. So that's the third yoga. And the fourth yoga of the four that I was mentioning, this Vedantic scheme of things, is Raja Yoga, the path of meditation, concentration. Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is one of the main foundational scriptures in Hinduism in general, which teaches this path. And we can and should try to combine these four yogas to the best of our ability. Thank you, that's a very good question. So let me cap off this discussion of kind of SBNR and all that. So I think it's a mistake to fall into this either or kind of thinking. So I'm spiritual, therefore I'm not religious. And those religious people aren't spiritual. I think that's a serious mistake. And it's better to adopt more of a both and kind of approach here. Because I believe in spiritual life, because I'm spiritual, I'm also religious, which means I'm not just going to talk spirituality and judge others for being less spiritual than I am. I mean, one should never do that. But let me try to actively practice spirituality in my day-to-day life. Let me try to spiritualize every moment of my life. And in my opinion, that's what the religion aspect of spiritual life really connotes, which is there should be a living and dynamic practice as the kind of engine or the nucleus of our spiritual life. Other questions? Yes? Yeah. Can we get the mic to her? Who has the... Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Well, it's really not a question, but what you just said brought up one of your final points about the Peace Pilgrim of non-separateness, non-duality, and seeing things as the whole.
And as one, as divine oneness, basically, yeah. I think it's very important. And this is another keynote of Vedanta, is seeing divine oneness everywhere. This is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. It's mentioned in one of the most ancient Upanishads, the Isha Upanishad. And Peace Pilgrim, as I said, she kind of independently confirmed these Vedantic insights through her own experiences. And I think that's one of the things that makes her so powerful. It's like Eckhart Tolle on the Advaitic side, independently confirming the truths of non-dual Vedanta, it seems to be. But it's more complicated. I have a separate talk on Eckhart Tolle. I gave here, actually, a while ago. Yeah. But his Vedanta is actually a little bit more complicated than this, just that. Yeah, so you first, and then Michael in the back.
Okay. I was just a bit curious, thinking about a non-dualist perspective and relating it to what you're saying about kind of the epidemic right now with people, especially younger women, feeling really identified with their bodies. I just am kind of having a hard time like parsing that, because it's like at one point, if everything is the same, everything is Brahman, then wouldn't you, in a sense, like be your body? Like, I'm just curious how you would parse it out in a way you're trying to like help someone who's maybe struggling.
Sure. No, that's a great question. It's very practical. So, yeah, everything is divine. That's what Vedanta teaches. There's nothing but the divine. But at the same time, what's a healthy attitude toward our own physical bodies? There are instruments. So they're us in a certain sense, in the way that our Honda Accord is us. It's mine, right? But you don't identify with it. That's why I use that analogy in the talk, right? I don't say I am my Honda Accord. I say I use my Honda Accord. It's my Honda Accord, and I use it, which means what? You need to keep it in good working order. You've got to fill it up with gas. You got to give it oil changes, and so on. Likewise, you need to keep the body healthy and well. But the moment you identify with it, that becomes the be-all and the end-all. And you lose sight of your deeper spiritual nature, your deeper spiritual identity, and that's the problem. There's a beautiful, very moving incident which took place in Cairo, in Egypt, long back in the 1890s. Swami Medhananda was walking with a group of people, and they, by accident, walked into the red light district of Cairo. And there are all these street prostitutes heckling him because he's wearing these robes, and so they were taunting him and heckling and this and that. And this group got scandalized that they even walked into the red light district. And there's a woman like this famous opera singer named Madame Emma Calvé, a French opera singer. So she was trying to steer him away from these prostitutes. And, you know, because he's being heckled and all that. And it's embarrassing for everyone involved. He takes a beeline straight for the prostitutes. And they're even more scandalized. And he starts crying. And he looks at them. They don't understand a word of English. But he says, poor creatures. Poor children. They have placed their beauty and they have placed their divinity in their beauty. Now look at them. They only think about their own physical beauty, and because of that, they've ended up in this situation. And they could tell immediately that he was a great saint, and they just started weeping themselves. And one of them kissed the hem of his robe. Another one said in Spanish, they knew their mother tongue was Spanish, "Hombre de Dios, hombre de Dios," which means man of God. There's another incident like this involving Sri Ramakrishna. He was so God intoxicated that his wealthy patron, Motur Babu, got kind of worried and thought, he's a little too God obsessed. He needs to come back down to earth. So he came up with a stratagem. And he said, come with me. And he took him to this place without saying where he took him. And he said, go into that room. And he goes into the room. And there's this beautiful prostitute. And the moment Sri Ramakrishna sees her, he sees Divine Mother in the form of that prostitute and goes into samadhi, goes into a state of divine ecstasy. And then she becomes flustered and embarrassed. So the same kind of thing ensues. So these great saints, they don't look at themselves, and they don't look at other people as bodies. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, pointing to this, the body, he says, this is just a pillowcase, kol matro. It's a pillowcase. Does that mean that you should neglect it, or that you should hate it, or that you should shun it, or that you should, no. But the right attitude is, it's a pillowcase, it's a vehicle, it's an instrument to serve the purposes of the soul within us. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a great question. Michael, can you get the mic back there? Yeah.
Two questions. First one's hopefully pretty quick. With Peace Pilgrim, is there any evidence that she had read Indian literature?
It's a good question. At all? Yeah. I mean, in the book itself, I found absolutely no evidence. Of course, there are point-blank questions about karma and rebirth. And the word karma is a Vedantic term. It's a Hindu term. And she was clearly aware of it. She believed in it. She met all sorts of people. It's actually similar in a certain way with Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna dropped out of school at the age of 6. But that didn't mean that he was not exposed to different scriptures and religious traditions. He would meet pundits, people who would recite the scriptures to him. He had an amazing memory, and so he would recall things. And so I think maybe something similar can be said about her. And I don't know what her reading practice was like. She doesn't really talk about it much. She, of course, knew about the Bible. Whether she knew about Vedanta, whether she knew about the teachings of the Gita, I'm not aware of it. Maybe people who have done deeper research into Peace Pilgrim's life would be able to answer that. But as far in the book itself, Peace Pilgrim, I haven't seen any evidence that she read Vedantic texts. But that doesn't mean that she couldn't have heard about their teachings from others, or that even she might have even read some of these books. But that's not mentioned in Peace Pilgrim. Yeah, other questions? Oh yeah,
second.
go ahead. Mhm. No problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kind of expanding upon the earlier point, I think kind of helped me understand it a little bit. But it's like, as you mentioned, the pillowcase. It's not that we necessarily want to like neglect the pillowcase, but not like deify it either. And I was kind of wondering if you could expand upon the idea of like this higher self and lower self within like a non-dual perspective as well. Is it kind of like the non-dual, like your lower self? You don't want to get so caught up in it that you can't see the higher portion of this that is part of this like overall oneness. I guess could the same also be true of your higher
I
self
see.
at a certain level? Or
That's very interesting. Yeah. Okay. This is a kind of a subtle philosophical question here. So Vedanta, and I don't like making generalization. I'm a scholar, and so I try to avoid that. So, but at least our tradition of Vedanta, our understanding of Vedanta holds, or at least my interpretation of our tradition. I have to add all these qualifications. It's a non-dual spiritual philosophy, but one that's distinct from Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. Okay, because according to Shankara, the highest truth is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, Jivo Brahma Vinaparaha. That's the famous Sanskrit formula, which means non-dual, impersonal, attributeless, pure consciousness alone is real. Everything else is an illusion. And each of us, as jivas, is identical with that non-dual pure consciousness. So that's Advaita Vedanta according to Shankara's school. It seems to me, and I've written books on this, you can, if you're interested, you can look at it, Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality. I call Sri Ramakrishna's non-dual philosophy, it's also non-dual, but I call it Vijnana Vedanta. And it's based on a different kind of non-dual spiritual realization, which he called Vijnana. And hence I gave it the phrase, I call his philosophy Vijnana Vedanta for that reason. It's based on this very special and expansive spiritual state of Vijnana. It's a state of perceiving divine oneness everywhere. We're talking, even like Peace Pilgrim talks about divine oneness. But this is a oneness that doesn't exclude anything. I gave an entire talk in Hollywood, I think Ellis came, called Why Sri Ramakrishna Couldn't Subtract. Because there's a funny fact that when he was a school kid, before he dropped out, he could do addition, but he could never subtract. And on that basis, I start with that story, but I say, I'd contrast these two different kinds of non-dual philosophy. Shankara's is a kind of subtractive Advaita Vedanta. It's Brahman alone is real, let me subtract the world, let me subtract the personal God, let me subtract individual souls, what's left is Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna says, don't subtract anything. We don't need to subtract anything. Now coming back to this, you're bringing up the lower self and the higher self, and you're asking, well, how is the lower self part of that divine oneness? If everything is one and everything is divine, then shouldn't the lower self also play a role in the divine economy, in the divine scheme of things? And the answer is yes. Sri Ramakrishna himself says, Divine Mother herself has become both avidya maya and vidya maya. These are technical terms, okay? There are two kinds of maya. One is the maya of avidya, the maya of ignorance, any selfish qualities, lust, anger, greed, worldly attachments, and so on, worldly desires, all falls under in the category of the lower self. Divine Mother has equally become that, as much as she's become the maya of knowledge, vidya maya, which are ethical and spiritual qualities, like being generous and charitable and selfless and devotional and spiritual and detached and so on and so forth. Both are equally mother, but because she manifests both as ignorance and as knowledge, both as the lower self and as the higher self. So that's a non-duality, but it's one that doesn't exclude anything. Now, if you could ask yourself, well, now I'm confused. Which one should I accept and why and all that? That gets very complicated. That's why you have to read my book if you want more details on this. But it has certain advantages. Number one, if you just look at the Vedantic scriptures, very rarely, if at all, do you find the scriptures teaching that the world is an illusion or a dream. I'm talking about the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutra, which are the foundational scriptures of Vedanta. I don't find it. You find statements like anityam asukham lokam. This world is impermanent, but not that it's a dream. And in fact, in the Chandogya Upanishad, when the question is raised, how does the ultimate reality, Brahman, relate to this world of names and forms? The rishi, the sage, gives two metaphors which have become very famous. One is, Brahman manifests as this world like formless clay, when a potter shapes formless clay into different kinds of pots. Another example, when a goldsmith fashions molten gold into golden earrings, golden necklace, golden bracelets. Does this support classical Advaita Vedanta, the subtractive kind of Advaita Vedanta, which says this world is a dream? Does it make more sense to say that the golden necklace is an illusory appearance of gold? Or does it make more sense to say the golden necklace is a real but impermanent manifestation of the gold? Does it make more sense to say the clay pot is an illusory appearance of the clay, or that the clay pot is a real but impermanent manifestation of the clay? Now coming back to Shankara's Advaita, you might say, well, you're misrepresenting Shankara. What was his favorite metaphor? The rope and the snake. I see something from a distance, I think it's a snake, I start freaking out. And then I get closer, and I go, oh, wait a minute. That was a rope all along. At that point, what do I say about that snake? Well, there's no snake anymore. I say, oh, I see. What I thought was a snake was actually an illusory appearance of the rope. Everything in this world, every name and form, every one of us, the chairs, the table, God. Different illusory appearances of the one non-dual Brahman is Shankara's view. Sri Ramakrishna's view, every name and form is a real manifestation of the one divine, the one infinite divine. So that, in a nutshell, I'm contrasting these two non-dual philosophies. I think that Peace Pilgrim subscribed more to the Vijnana Vedanta kind of additive, non-exclusionary kind of non-dual philosophy that Sri Ramakrishna taught, not Shankara's. Because Shankara, what happens with Shankara's is that he ends up relegating not just the entire world to the status of dream and illusion, but the personal God as well. So where's the scope for bhakti at that point? A lot of people talk a lot about non-duality without reading the original text, and then they run into a problem because they think that devotion is compatible with, show me. Let's talk about the text. What is Shankara's view on whether devotion is compatible with the path of knowledge and with Advaita Vedanta? His answer is an emphatic no. Devotion is a preparatory discipline for purifying and concentrating the mind. Then you have to stop the devotion. Why? What's the logic? Shankara's logic is very simple. Devotion, this is for him. Now, I'm not talking about Ramakrishna now, I'm talking about Shankara. Shankara says, so long as you are practicing devotion, you are reinforcing duality. Because you are the devotee on the one hand and God is on the other side. And you are practicing devotion toward God, which means what? So long as you're practicing devotion, you're reinforcing that sense of duality between you, God's creature, and God. How is that going to help you to realize the non-dual truth? This is Shankara's logic. Sri Ramakrishna says, God herself has become each one of us. So that just completely collapses the duality. There's no duality anymore. Each one of us is, like Peace Pilgrim says, a drop in the ocean of God. And then you don't run into those problems anymore. Yeah, great question. Anyone else? Wow, I left you speechless with that.
Nobody? Well, I'll go ahead and share a quick story. And this is in regards to when you discussed atheism.
Yeah.
Years ago, I had this conversation with Swami Medhananda. And a personal trainer at the gym where I worked out was all shook up because he just finished working.
All shook up, yeah.
Yeah,
Why?
because he was upset because a client of his was an atheist.
Oh, that's funny.
And he goes,
Okay.
I can't believe how he doesn't believe in God. And I said, rephrasing what Swahananda said, is that is his connection to God.
Oh, that's
I go,
wonderful. Yeah.
out of all your clients, who talks about God more than anybody? He goes, my atheist clients.
That's
And I go,
Right.
so do you understand that
Right.
now? And he goes, oh, he was so relieved. He
That's
goes,
so
so
funny.
that's their connection to God. I go, they talk about God more than anybody, especially to somebody that's elevated. Very little. You can't come to a party and somebody that's an atheist will be more vocal than somebody that's highly spirited in their divine.
No, I think that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that. I didn't know, he's my guru, Swahanandaji, so I'm glad to hear these kinds of stories. That's great. Yeah, so for the atheist, their atheism is their connection with the divine. I think that's lovely. I think Peace Pilgrim basically agrees with that, would agree with that. Yeah, yeah. This reminds me of, there are stories kind of about how Ravana, the great enemy of Rama, was actually, paradoxically, one of the greatest bhaktas of Rama because he was obsessing about him all the time. I hate you so much. I love you. the kind of Richard Dawkins and these, they're people who made themselves famous by writing books defending atheism. So one of his books is called The God Delusion. But he spilled more ink and spent more time thinking about God than most so-called religious people. So I think that's a great point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And everybody's on their own journey. This is important. Let me say this also. Every spiritual aspirant is on their own journey. And a good teacher is not going to force the person, their interlocutor, the person that they're talking to, within the straitjacket of how they understand spiritual life and spirituality. I think that's a serious mistake. The best teachers will take you understand who you are, and then help you from where you are. And so for atheists, look, you need to be able to, there are different avenues into spirituality. And so maybe talk of God's not going to be helpful for them, but talk of natural beauty, finding your higher nature through natural beauty, through music. There are many ways, through service, right? But yeah, to be too doctrinaire about it and fundamentalist and saying that everybody needs to believe in God, that shows a kind of insecurity on our part if we feel that way. It's because we're not secure in our own beliefs that we feel almost threatened in some kind of unconscious way by people who don't believe it. Because the hard truth is, Vedanta maintains, it's really true, nobody really believes in God so long as there's impurities in their heart, so long as they have worldly attachments and desires. Sri Ramakrishna says it explicitly. We can't even believe in God until we have purified our hearts to a certain extent. And Swami Medhananda says, these are both in the Gospel, you'll find. Swami Medhananda says, one does not believe in God so long as one has any desires in the heart. And so having true, unshakable belief in God requires realization, actually. Nothing short of that. And at the very least, a very, very pure mind. Until then, we talk about God. Most of us don't even believe in God. Swami Vivekananda used to say, most people are unconscious atheists who self-complacently believe that they are devout religious believers. It's a devastating statement. See, there's not as much of a gap. And those people, especially the ones who kind of look down on atheists, feel threatened by atheists, criticize atheists, they fall into that category. Unconscious atheists, they themselves, it's like the thing that was happening in the 80s, all these Republican senators condemning homosexuality, and it turns out that they themselves were gay on the side, you know what I mean? Okay, so anyone else? Next question. Yeah, please. Can we pass the mic up? Sorry, thank you.
I don't have a question, but I have such an incredible experience that happened to me years ago. I have a daughter-in-law who really doesn't like me. And I was in Costco shopping, and I had asked her if I could keep the grandchildren for an hour longer than they were supposed to be picked up. And she got really mad at me and was screaming at me, and I was crying through Costco. And I didn't. So anyway, I went home. I didn't say anything to my husband Steve here, or call him up and complain about my daughter-in-law again. And when I woke up in the morning, and every cell in my body was in love with Vicky.
Who is Vicky?
My daughter-in-law.
Okay.
Every cell. I have never, ever experienced anything like it before. And I just wanted to call and tell her how much I loved her. I wanted to send her flowers. I was just like in this euphoria of love. And it was such a blessing and such a gift. And I hope that someday, again, I wake up feeling that type of love for all.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I think that's a good example of what Peace Pilgrim talks about when you feel any kind of negative feeling. Like the impulse might have been to react and feel sorry for yourself, get angry at your daughter-in-law.
My usual response.
Yeah, right. But then you chose to?
But it was just given to me.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah. No, that's nice. Oh, well, that's a gift of grace. Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Others? Oh, yeah, that's great. So Krishna Prana came up to me right after the talk and told me that she At least she saw the Peace Pilgrim. I don't know if she met the Peace Pilgrim. Did she actually meet her and talk to her? Oh, okay. I understood that she. Okay, but at the very least, she saw the Peace Pilgrim here because the Peace Pilgrim apparently in the 70s visited this convent. And was she here or was this pre-nun days? Do you know what? I don't know. Do we know? Do you know?
I think it, yeah.
Sorry? In Santa Barbara, not necessarily in this convent. So Krishna Prana, the most senior nun here, saw, if not met, the Peace Pilgrim in the 1970s somewhere in Santa Barbara. Yeah, so that's a wonderful thing. I'm glad that I could give a talk here on that. Yes. Anyone else?
I'm sure Peace Pilgrim was inspired by meeting Krishna Prana.
Well, Lord knows. So we don't know. We don't even know if they met exactly. That's something to be confirmed. She saw her. I mean, whether they met, I don't know. And yeah, but as I said, this is in relation to that Michael's first question, which is it's possible that she met Vedantins along the way, and maybe they told. I was like, oh wow, your teachings, they really resonate with the Gita or with the teachings of Ramakrishna or Vivekananda or Ramana Maharshi or this or that, and so it's entirely possible. Especially think about it in the 60s, 70s, there's hippies and there's this new exposure to Eastern traditions and cultures, people running off to India, and so it's entirely possible. But in the book itself, she doesn't say that she was influenced by any Vedantic texts, scriptures, or exponents, as far as I'm aware. Yeah. Anyone else? No? Think we're good. Yeah, okay, we got someone in the back there. Cal Pauli. Sorry, tell me your name.
My name's Johnny.
Hi, Johnny.
I was just wondering, first, like a clarification. During your talk, you were saying that all religions are essentially like catered to people, but they all, were you implying like lead to the same place eventually?
Yeah.
Okay, and then I was just wondering on that. I'm trying to think of exactly how to phrase this, sorry.
Okay.
But is it possible for someone, almost in terms of the spiritual but not religious people, is it possible for someone without knowledge of these pre-established traditions to come to the same realization of whatever God or the one thing that they're all pointing towards is? Like I said before, without those traditions, because I feel like in a way you'd be stuck in the, sorry, I'm already forgetting the term, but in like the lower
tier or something?
Yeah, in the lower tiers.
Yeah.
Because you can't, it's harder to reach it without some sort of guru or even tradition or text to call back on. I was just
Okay, this is a great question. It's a deep question, and I've written on this. I've devoted chapters of my books to these kinds of questions. So let me try to untangle some of the strands in my answer. So first of all, okay, there's an overused metaphor of the mountaintop, which she uses, and Ramakrishna will have his own metaphors, some of which are overused, like the blind man and the elephant and stuff like that. Now, what exactly is that mountaintop? What exactly is that elephant? This is a serious question. And there are different answers, even within Vedanta and Hinduism, actually. And so what is Ramakrishna's answer? I think that's important. What he says is, the ultimate goal is realization of some aspect or form of one and the same infinite, impersonal, personal divine. That's a mouthful, but I'm gonna so it's important that I say this, though, because one can easily narrow the understanding of the mountaintop, the elephant, the chameleon, and say everybody has to come to the non-dual realization in the end. The narrower your understanding of the common goal, the more you're ending up either leaving out certain people or putting them on a lower footing. Okay, let me give you an example. So in philosophy of religion and theology, there are three terms that are constantly used: exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism. Okay. Exclusivism, if I'm a religious exclusivist, it means that my religion alone is true and the highest. Other religions are just false. They'll lead you to hell, and so on. You'll find a lot of religious fundamentalists who are exclusivists. But there's religious inclusivism, which is the view that my religion is the highest. Other religions aren't completely hopeless or wrong, but they're lower than mine in some way. They're inferior to my religion in some way. Now, I don't want to get too controversial here, but the official Catholic position from the 1960s, Nostra Aetate, that's the Latin document that the Pope composed at the time, expresses a form of Catholic inclusivism, which is that Catholicism is the best. Other religions may contain a ray of the same truth that is expressed in its fullness in the tradition of Catholicism. Okay. On the Indian side, Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, especially in its more modern forms, modern variants, like advocated by Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan, T.M.P. Mahadevan, and others, is a kind of Vedantic form of inclusivism, because they understand the mountaintop, this common goal, as non-dual realization of impersonal pure consciousness. Now, what's the problem with that, you might say? Well, it has an inclusivist structure. There's always a higher and lower kind of a structure there. And so where does that leave devotees of the personal God? Where does it leave bhaktas? Where does it leave person who love Christ or Krishna or Ganesha or Kali or Allah? What these non-dual Advaitins will say is, yeah, good. You practice your bhakti to your heart's content, purify your minds, realize your Allah, realize your Kali, all that's good, but it's not the highest goal. Realization of the personal God cannot be the highest goal because the personal God itself is within Maya. It's part of the illusion. So the only way to gain the highest realization, to reach the mountaintop, is to even leave behind those devotional practices, leave behind even any kind of realization or ecstatic kind of knowledge of the personal God, and ultimately ascend to the heights of non-dual realization, of non-dual pure consciousness. And Ramakrishna, by contrast, was what's called a religious pluralist. Religious pluralism is a view that my religion will lead me to the highest goal, but your religion can equally take you to the highest goal. This is really important. Okay. Now, does that mean that he's saying that everybody has to realize God in the way that he's realized God? No. Remember, that's why he defines the mountaintop in such a capacious way. The realization of any aspect or form of the impersonal, personal, infinite divine. So the Advaitin, who wants to just merge his identity in non-dual Brahman, that's the mountaintop for him. But it would be a mistake to say that everybody has to attain that same non-dual realization. There are other people. Saint Teresa of Avila is a good example of this great Catholic mystic who, she never seemed to have any kind of non-dual realization, but she had ecstatic realizations of Christ. All sorts of realizations of the personal God. The formless personal, God with form as well. Is that lower than the non-dual realization? Sri Ramakrishna says no. Somebody asked Sri Ramakrishna one day, don't bhaktas, don't devotees also ultimately have to attain the non-dual realization? And his answer is no. In many devotional traditions, he says, there is Nitya Krishna and Nitya Bhakta. God is eternal and God's devotees are also eternal. Chinmoy Sham, Chinmoy Dham, which means God is divine consciousness and his abode is also equally divine consciousness. And so Sri Ramakrishna would distinguish as two fundamentally different forms of liberation or salvation. And he called them eating sugar and becoming sugar. So eating sugar is what devotees want. They want to eat sugar. They want to enjoy the sweetness of loving communion with the personal God in the form that they love, in an eternal heaven. Shankarites, followers of Shankara, say there's no such thing as an eternal heaven. Things can be really hunky-dory up there. It can last a long time, but it's not eternal. Sorry. Ultimately, the highest goal has to be merging your nature, your individuality in non-dual pure consciousness. That's what Sri Ramakrishna calls becoming sugar. And instead of going into these hierarchical games of saying one form of liberation is higher than the other, he says both are equally valid and valuable, and it's a matter of temperament, which one you choose. But both are equally liberative. Both are equally states of liberation. Why? Because you're liberated from rebirth. You don't have to come back here. You're liberated from all suffering in either case. Whether you're in an eternal heaven or whether you're one with non-dual Brahman, no suffering anymore. So they both qualify as forms of liberation. So does that answer your question, or is that a prelude to an answer to your question?
No, it answers my question.
Okay. Yes, thank you. So I think it's really important to define the common goal of all religions in a very, very broad way and avoid the narrowness and sectarianism of some of the traditions that we know and say the common goal of all religions is the goal of my religion, which, so that becomes problematic in its own right. It becomes a form of inclusivism. Yeah.
So I asked
Can we get the mic to, yeah.
So I asked Swami Medhananda, do you see God?
Mm-hmm.
And his response was, yes, but not in the way you see him.
Yes, but not in the way you see him.
Right.
What does that mean? Or how did you understand it? Huh? What? Yeah, Chidra.
The rest of people don't know what they're looking at.
Okay. Oh, I see. Oh, but oh, no, I thought the thing that confused me about the statement was, are most of us looking at God? Oh, I see. Okay. So yeah, okay. So that makes more sense than what I think. What Chitravananda is saying is probably right, which is that most people think of God in a certain way, as like God up in the clouds or in a certain form or whatever, but that He has some kind of deeper, more intimate, or maybe more internal kind of realization of God. Yeah, that's really nice. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. These are wonderful things, little tidbits. Because usually he wouldn't be that forthright, and he would kind of be indirect. But yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, we got a question over there, on the other side.
Can you elaborate more on the concept of a non-dual realization? Is that a kind of qualitative experience, or is it something that can be achieved through like meditation, thinking? Is that something you have to experience, or is it a kind of realization, or is it both? I guess
Okay.
I'm sort of trying to understand what that might be like as a qualitative experience that someone might
Yeah,
feel.
that's one what?
That someone might feel.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, look, these are hard questions because you're asking for a kind of intellectual answer, a verbal answer to a question about spiritual experience, right? And it has to be experienced. Sri Ramakrishna, in his own inimitable way, used the example of a salt doll, a doll made of salt, which is on a boat, and it goes to measure the depth of the ocean. And so but the moment it sets foot in the ocean, what happens? The salt all melts into the ocean. So I think he's capturing the phenomenology, the experience of non-dual realization there. It's the ideas. See, even when you use the word experience, there's a kind of presupposition of subject-object duality, right? I am experiencing X. I am experiencing bliss. I am experiencing joy. That can't be the highest goal then for Advaitins, for non-dualists, right? What they're going to say is, you are bliss itself. Satchit Ananda. We are bliss, but if you're still experiencing bliss, you're still in the realm of duality. Okay, so now with that in the background, the highest state according to certain followers of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta is what's called Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Why do I say certain followers and not Shankara himself? You never see him use that term anywhere in his commentaries, but it's used by many of his followers. He talks about samadhi itself very briefly in certain places, but very rarely. So anyway, many of his followers, especially in what they do, there's a kind of yoga strand of Advaita Vedanta, which strongly emphasizes the need for nirvikalpa samadhi in order to attain the knowledge of non-dual Brahman. Okay, and what happens in the state of samadhi? You lose all external consciousness. So that's part of what the experience is. So Sri Ramakrishna was in that state for a period of almost 6 months, when he had no external consciousness. And so then you might be wondering, well, how did the body keep going? There was a sadhu who had a stick, and he whacked him over the head with the stick so that he could gain just enough partial external consciousness to get a little bit of milk down his throat so that the body would continue. So that's the samadhi state where you lose external consciousness. But then there's a question, even within the Advaita tradition, there are some people who, after attaining the state of nirvikalpa samadhi, come back to this world. And the question is, how do they look upon this world? How do they act? Now it gets complicated. And sorry, but I'm an inveterate scholar here, and so I'm gonna refer to an article, a scholarly article, almost 50 pages, by a professor named Lance Nelson. He might be retired by now. He's based in San Diego. It's a great article on classical Advaitic views on Jivan Mukti, the possibility of being liberated while still in the physical body. So the person who attains the highest Brahman knowledge of Brahman and then comes back to tell about it and to teach others and to walk around and instruct, like Shankara himself and others, right? How does Advaita Vedanta explain the person who is liberated while still in the physical body? Why is that a problem? The problem is, remember, Brahma, this entire world of names and forms is an illusion, which means if somebody comes back from the state of samadhi and still remains in the physical body, you'll find it in the article. They say the Jivan Mukta, the one who is quote unquote liberated while still in the physical body, has a trace of ignorance left. Avidya Lesha, which accounts for his continued existence in the physical body and which accounts for his continued perception of this illusory world. So I like to use the analogy of a dream. There are 3 states that we can distinguish with this dream metaphor. One is, I'm in the dream and I don't know that I'm dreaming. That's common. That's how most people dream. That's how I dream most of the time. Okay. But there's a second stage or state where I'm in the dream, but I know that I'm dreaming. That's called lucid dreaming, right? Some people have that. I think the lucid dreamer is equivalent to the Jivan Mukta in classical Advaita Vedanta, in Shankara's tradition. But that's not the highest state. The highest state is waking up from the dream. Good riddance to this body. Because even the very fact that I'm in the body signals to me that I still have a trace of ignorance. Totapuri, who was the Advaita Vedanta teacher of Sri Ramakrishna, he had already attained samadhi before he came to Sri Ramakrishna. He had already realized Brahman. He was a Jivan Mukta. And he taught Sri Ramakrishna, gave him the highest knowledge. And then what happened? Really interesting. He comes down with some terrible stomach ailment. Now the thing is, he's already broken his identification with body consciousness. He doesn't feel identified with the body. So yeah, the body's suffering, but he's not suffering. He knows. He's the non-dual Atman separate from the body-mind complex. So why should he be bothered? He's not bothered. So what does he plan to do? Let me kill myself. Because he's not killing himself, he's just getting rid of the body. He's a realized soul. He has attained the acme of Advaitic realization, and he says, since I know I'm not the body, it's like when, if I have a 15-year-old car and it's 250,000 miles, let me get rid of the car. There's no point in even selling it because I'm not going to get much for it. So let me just dump it in the dumpster. This was Totapuri's take on this. So what does he do? He goes to kill the body. I was going to say kill himself, but he knows he's not killing himself. He goes to get rid of the body. How? By drowning. He finds, miraculously, he's not able to. He walks deeper and deeper into this river or this lake, which is normally very, very deep. And he finds he can't. He can't. There's not enough water to kill himself. And then he has this ecstatic realization that everything is Divine Mother. Everything is Divine Mother. And Sri Ramakrishna, so the way that I interpret this whole thing is that Totapuri came and gave to Sri Ramakrishna the Advaitic knowledge. He taught him this highest non-dual knowledge. And then Sri Ramakrishna turned around and said, Totapuri, I mean, not in these words, but he says, even your knowledge is one-sided. You still need to accept my Divine Mother. And he made him accept it. He moved him away from just jnana, which he already had before he even came to Sri Ramakrishna, to become a vijnani, to attain the state of vijnana, where you realize that the God is equally impersonal and personal. Both Brahman and Shakti are the static and dynamic aspects of one and the same infinite divine truth. Long answer to the question, but sorry, I had to nerd out a little bit. Okay, it's exactly 1 o'clock. Should we wrap it up? Let's do it. Thank you, everyone. Great questions. Om, thank you. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Parnamastu. We just made the Q&A into a Karma Yoga by offering it to the Divine. Thank you, everyone. Jai Ma. Whoa, sorry. Yeah. No.
What's that over there? She said, I'm going to pick on one for you. He says, oh, those are the Jehovah's Witnesses. I have the answer.
You got the answer. Oh, wow. Oh, good. Okay.
Actually, it was kind of interesting because
Yeah.
she said she didn't want a lot of
Attention. Yeah, yeah.
by that time. There were people following her.
Oh, okay. I see.
Newscasters were always out. The freeway at that time, it was the 101. It had one or two traffic lights on it. It was a 4-lane highway. She stopped on the station and had traffic lights. And she was walking along.
I see. You were in a car or something, and I see. Okay, so you saw her on the 101 walking. Oh, interesting. Okay.
She's walking through Santa Barbara, so we went down.
And then did you say hello, or did you shake hands, or? Yeah. Okay, right. I see. So you did meet her. Look at that. All right. It's wonderful. Someone in the flesh. You met Peace Pilgrim.
Now that can, next time you give a lecture, you can say, one of the senior nuns.
Right.
Santa Barbara.
Yeah. Who met the Peace Pilgrim. That's wonderful.